So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to our last session today. I'm very honored to welcome you all here on stage. I just want to introduce them shortly. To my left, Mr. Mathias Döpfner, CEO of Axel Springer. Then Mr. Guillaume Liegey, founder and CEO of Liegey, Müller & Pons, the man behind the success of the French President Macron. Then Mr. Andrus Ansip, Vice President of the EU Commission, and also a very warm welcome to Florian Heinemann, founding partner of Project A Ventures. Mr. Ansip, we want to talk about digitalism, about the law actually we have in Europe. We want to talk about the GDPR, the ePrivacy. Can you just short explain for everybody who is here and wasn't in touch with ePrivacy, what is this? What is coming to us?
At first, this GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, it's about personal data, how to deal with personal data, how to move those personal data, how to protect personal data. And ePrivacy Regulation is about confidentiality of communication. And this is not only about personal data, but this is also about business data, non-personal data. This is also about machine-to-machine data. 92% of European citizens, they asked for confidentiality of communication, whatever means of communication people they are using. Today we have e-privacy directive, but this is only about telecom operators, and confidentiality of communication is guaranteed only when talking about telcos. But when talking about platforms, in legal meaning, it's not guaranteed.
You said in the near future most economic activity will depend on data, but if data cannot move freely, our growth potential is limited. However, both the General Data Protection Regulation and the ePrivacy regulations are widely criticized by the Europe's digital industry as destroying their business. So, Mr. Döpfner said, what do you say about this? Is it destroying it?
No way. No way. General Data Protection Regulation is telling us how to move, for example, those personal data. And there is another proposal about free data flows. This is about non-personal data. Today, trend in the European Union is quite bad when talking about non-personal data. We already have 56 different sets of rules in 21 member states dealing with forceful data localization. And that's why we launched this free data flows proposal, according with there will be possible to move those data across the European Union freely, without any kind of barriers.
Mr. Döpfner, I think you have a totally different opinion to that. You are not only CEO of Axel Springer Publishing House, also president of the Federation of German Newspaper Publishers. Is it destroying the business? What would you like to answer?
Well, first of all, the general goal of the e-privacy regulation is a very understandable and a very important goal. I've said for many years that a responsible and transparent policy with regards to user data usage is an absolutely important element and is a competitive advantage. Companies who do that responsibly have an advantage, and it will be more and more important, and we see it in the very present discussion about Cambridge Analytica and Facebook. But this e-privacy regulation in Brussels is one of the examples where a good intention is turning with this regulation into the opposite direction. It's achieving exactly the opposite of what it wants to achieve. This law, if it is going to implement it in the current draft, will seriously damage smaller and mid-sized European companies, ranging from e-commerce to publishing, and it will be a huge benefit for the American tech platforms. We did a tour in Silicon Valley at the end of January, and we mentioned it to the top management and to the founders of Snapchat, of Facebook, of Google, of Apple. And they all were smiling and saying, well, that's very interesting what you're doing in Europe. For us, it's great because we have the logins. We don't need the third-party cookies. But for the European players and for the smaller companies, these third-party cookies are existential, and they're also in the interest of the consumer. So the devil is in the detail. The technicalities of this draft are just not good because you have this opt-out policy, and that will lead to a fact that nobody is going to actively, the opt-in policy, and no one will actively opt in. So the browser decides, and 85% of the browsers that are used in Germany, for example, that is Microsoft, Google, Apple, and Firefox, 85% is American. So this is, for me, honestly, I have to say it, it's an anti-Europe law. It's just to the benefit of the big tech platforms in America.
So whenever you like, you can interrupt yourself because you were smiling a little bit. I'm not sure if you're agreeing or disagreeing, but let me bring everybody into the round.
Of course I disagree.
Sure, of course, but later, Mr. Heinemann, but I think you're agreeing to it.
Yeah, adding to that, we invest quite a lot in European startups. That's our focus. And I think exactly what Mr. Döpfner said, the American tech players have a big advantage because they have a much easier task in getting people to opt in. That's just the fact. And even if you look today, the targeting quality, which leads to the audience quality that people will use for targeting later on, that you sell to advertisers, already companies like even Axel Springer, not even talking about the smaller ones, have a disadvantage vis-a-vis Google and Facebook because the targeting quality that these companies produce is just a lot stronger for various reasons that they have deserved because they earned it due to great business they've done. But if you look at basically this today, this distance in targeting quality, which will directly harm the sales business of Axel Springer, but also smaller companies, that is directly related. And so if you make it harder for European companies, relatively speaking, to get opt-ins, and that's what it leads to, by definition, it will harm all businesses that are based in Europe. And GDPR, I would say, is not that bad. Yeah, so that's okay. The only problem that you have there is it is a lot of bureaucracy that's opposed or put onto enterprises. And obviously, a larger organization like Axel Springer has a much easier task in dealing with this bureaucracy than a 15-people startup has. Yeah? So that is the problem about GDPR. For me, that's not basically, it's not damaging businesses. It's just keeping them from doing something that they want to do, running their business. And I think if you have a big legal department, that's not that big of a problem. Yeah? So GDPR is not my problem. My problem is really, it's not great, but it's really ePrivacy, where I think where we honestly have to make the trade-off. And I think that is, the discussion needs to be, are we willing to potentially get more data privacy for harming our competitive situation vis-a-vis American companies? And that's a discussion that we're not having. We're basically having a discussion, do we want to protect our users better? You would argue, and I would agree, not even that is achieved. Yeah? But if we want to lead the discussion has to be, we want to achieve better privacy protection, but are we willing to sacrifice our competitive position, our relative competitive position vis-a-vis American companies, which is not great anyway. Yeah? I mean, we are not in a very good position as Europeans anyway. I mean, if you look at our competitive position vis-a-vis China and vis-a-vis America, it's not great anyway. So how this is going to play out in a 10 to 15-year time horizon, right now, I would say the chances that we are better off in 10, 15 years than we are today vis-a-vis the US and China are less than 10% anyway. And we're now reducing it even below that. And that is something I don't understand. You might argue ePrivacy is not, it's not the job of ePrivacy to support European businesses. Understood, yep. There might be a different regulation to do that, but we should at least see that the level playing field that you want to achieve, so that we are all competing on the same kind of playing field, that we're not making that worse. And I think we're definitely doing it with this kind of regulation.
Mr. Liegey, when listening to both gentlemen, it seems a little bit scared of e-privacy, or I'm a little bit scared of it. You are companies standing behind the success of, for example, President Macron in France. Are such campaigns still possible with e-privacy?
So I run a technology company that develops tools to understand and influence opinion at a very local level. And I must say we do that without stealing data from Facebook. I believe that the European regulation is actually a chance for companies like mine. I may be your only supporter in this stage, so glad we're close to each other.
Thank you.
The reason is we can build amazing targeting models with the data sets that exist in Europe. And we don't need to target people individually as they do in the US. So our company was built with the inspiration from the Obama campaign in 2008. And all the work we had been doing was how do we adapt the American campaign techniques, who have a lot of individual level data with almost no privacy regulation, to a context that will not change so much in my field. The German regulation, the French regulation are already very strict when it comes to political data. So we had to learn how to work with aggregate data. But aggregate data are great when it comes to campaigning. You can divide a city like Paris in almost 1,000 neighborhoods, Berlin roughly the same, so it's really helpful when it comes to organizing campaigning. So my answer is more optimistic. The GDPR in my business will not change anything if not creating entries to barriers of entry for our American competitors who have no clue how to work with the data that my company is using.
But can we really distinguish between the two things? I mean, he already did it. It's a huge difference between the data protection regulation and e-privacy. The data protection regulation has the opt-out as a principle. And that's something everybody can live with. And it should be there because the customer should have the possibility to say, no, I don't want to have cookies. That's fair, that's fine. In the case of the e-privacy regulation, it is the other way around. The browser decides the new normal will be no cookies, and the consumer has to actively say, but I want to have cookies. How many people are doing that? A tiny little fraction.
Oh, very
and
few.
that is, so you agree on that?
I completely agree. The question was more, does it affect the way campaigns are organized? And from that perspective, the answer is no, not so
But
much.
this is an important question.
Okay.
When talking about Facebook, talking about Google, so making it easier for them. It's just a cookie, yes, that's it. Why do you think people like Mr. Heinemann and Mr. Döpfner disagree?
Offer a glass of French wine for every opt-in. Maybe that's an idea.
Maybe.
To boost the French economy.
Like
Okay. You said general data protection regulation is not bad at all, but let's say our people, our startups, our companies, they said general data protection is a really good thing because instead to have 28 different sets of rules dealing with data protection in the European Union, now we have one single set of the data protection rules, and it's okay. Yeah. People, they know where are those dividing lines, and they can adapt. Then about China, I don't think European people ever will agree with some kind of social credit models or something like this. It will be not for European citizens. We cannot compare our situation with the situation they have in China. Then level playing field. The aim of this e-privacy regulation is exactly to create a level playing field. As I said, today's e-privacy directive, it's only about telecom operators. And today, platforms, OTTs, they can process their data and they can monetize those data. But at the same, telecom operators, they can process data only when they would like to improve quality of their own services. And no options, no possibilities to monetize those data. They asked for this. We said, okay, with this proposal, but only on basis of people's consent. And now, some people, they are unhappy. They say it's too much to ask for people's consent. So, but let's remember, about 92% of people who asked for confidentiality of communication. In context with what happened with Cambridge Analytica, I think no one is ready to say that we don't have to care about people's consent. We will make people happy using without any kind of consent their data. So if somebody will state that he will destroy his business. Not only consent is needed, but this consent has to be informed consent. When we would like to reach to some kind of content, then I am ready to tick all kinds of boxes just to get access to this content. But it has to be informed consent. I have to get this understanding how they will use my data later on. Today it's unclear, and there is some kind of cookies fatigue already, ticking boxes. So, and that's why we made this proposal about browser settings. It's, according to a Commission proposal, it's so that people, they have choice, either to ask for maximum protection or fully liberal approach, allowing all kind of cookies, or something in the middle.
But this
in
is
the parliament, they launched their own proposal. According, there will be just a privacy by default approach.
May I ask you two very concrete questions? You mentioned Cambridge Analytica. I have not met any expert over the last days who told me that the ePrivacy regulation would have blocked or would have not allowed a case like Cambridge Analytica. Do you really think that ePrivacy would have had any positive impact in order to avoid such a scandal? I don't think so, but perhaps you have an explanation how the ePrivacy regulation could have done it. So I think it is not even serving the customers. And the second question is, you said level playing fields, but how do you deal very concretely with the fact that the US tech platforms simply do not need third-party cookies? And they admit it. They don't need it because they have the logins. And that is a data treasury that is so huge that a third-party cookie is just not needed, but the smaller companies desperately need it. How do you deal with that element? Because it is always the principal idea of that regulation, as we said, is valid. But the technique, how it is drafted, is just achieving the opposite. So perhaps you can react to these two aspects.
Yeah, thank you. In fact, we know about this Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal through some kind of media sources, mainly thanks to this 20 minutes video clip produced by Channel 4, British Channel 4. And I don't have also too much more information what exactly happened there in Cambridge Analytica with those 50 million Facebook accounts. But according to General Data Protection Regulation, it's illegal. Sorry to say, but stealing was practiced already thousands of years ago, and it was criminal hundreds of years ago, and it will be criminal also in future. Nobody can be absolutely sure that their data or money will be stolen, but we have to do our utmost to protect our people's data, our people's money, our people's privacy. And definitely, this e-privacy regulation will help us.
But how? How would it have helped in that case?
In this special
because
case,
it is already illegal.
This is the question
ePrivacy doesn't prevent stealing. Yeah? That is,
it is already illegal.
How this e-privacy law is helping to protect this.
Max?
Never let this happen again. I think this is one of the main questions we have.
Well, my entire life in the greatest way.
I'm not able to understand how platforms, social media platforms, for example, they are able to get people's consent, and how it will be so complicated, practically impossible to get these people consent by European media entrepreneurs. So
I tell you why. Just imagine, if you're on Facebook, you have 1,000 friends on Facebook, and then the regulation changes, you need explicit consent, and you basically say, I have all my networks, 1,000 pictures, 50 videos on Facebook, and then you're asked, would you agree that this is okay? You say yes. But if you are Bild, Springer newspaper, and you have to consent that in order to read, I don't know, Boris Becker's new marriage problems story, then you're asked to give a consent to something where only a fraction of European population understands what they're consenting to. If you would combine it with kind of an idea like how the food industry does it, this is a potentially very intrusive business model that does a lot with your data, like an ample type system where you have a red, a yellow, or a green button where you basically say, the publishing businesses are all minimally intrusive when it comes to privacy because they don't build profiles, explicit profiles around it. Facebook, Amazon, Apple are highly intrusive profiles because they have lots of data points per person. Look at the data points they have per person, it's not a lot. So, but can I also react on this China and the US point, because I think that's very important. I'm not arguing that we should bring Chinese kind of context here, 100% agreed. But what we have to deal with, and I think everybody, especially in the European Commission, has to understand that, we're in a global economy. We're competing with US tech players that are worth more than the complete German stock market combined, and the same on the Chinese market. So the capital power that they have, the investment money they have, is just beyond everything we can imagine. And they will expand. And where can they expand? They will probably go to Europe and start, I mean, that has already started. Chinese buying European businesses, core tech, and we won't have a chance if we don't build our own digital champions to compete with that. And so the discussion really has to be, are we willing to sacrifice competitiveness for the potential of privacy protection? And I say, if everybody here agrees to the fact that, sure, I'm willing to be less off or less well off for a diffuse promise of having more data protection, I don't know how people would decide. You're arguing that we are still on a level playing field. That's not the case. If we would introduce something like that, we at least have to differentiate between intrusive business models and not so intrusive business models. You do the same thing across all business models, and that cannot be right.
And
just give me a second to bring Mr. Liegey back into our round. We are talking about people here, we're talking about Germany. Germans are always worried, they are always concerned. This is something natural in this country. How is it in France?
So actually there's an interesting debate that was started in France a month and a half ago, led by a French libertarian philosopher, and that does exist. His name is Gaspard Koenig, and he started a conversation about the possibility that users may monetize their data. Today, the deal that we have, the equilibrium, is Facebook, Google, everything's free because they make money using our data. Well, you could change that equilibrium and say, you pay for those services to access those services, and in exchange, you would be paid for sharing your data. And I think it's an interesting piece of the debate that I haven't learned. I don't know exactly how that would resonate beyond France, but it was pretty heated recently in France, and I think this is a missing part of the discussion. I'm not an expert, as you are, and as I described, our business is differently affected. But I think this part of the debate, whether you could change the business model and make sure that everyone makes money and pays for the services, maybe that could be part of the discussion as well.
But here I really can say that it is not a German issue. I know, and we are talking a lot to our French colleagues, to our Italian and Spanish colleagues, to our Polish colleagues. It is a concern that is widely spread among European tech companies, e-commerce companies,
especially
and European digital publishers, and particularly the small ones. And another worry is also, and that's why it is always important to discuss the details, you could now say, okay, if the law is like that, then the publisher, for example, still has the possibility to say, okay, but we can only offer our customers the services that we want to offer if they accept cookies. So you can use my website, my product, only if you install cookies. And even that is in the current draft of the ePrivacy regulation forbidden.
Why?
So you cannot do that. So why? Why don't you even leave that last room of freedom for an entrepreneur to say, okay, that's the deal. If you use my product, accept cookies. You forbid even that.
Why is it necessary?
It sounds strange. Americans and even Chinese, they are able to ask for people's consent here in the European Union in the way that our people will give their informed consent. But our own European enterprises are not able to ask for people's consent in the way they will get this yes. They expect that the answer will be always no when Europeans will ask for this consent. I cannot agree with this kind of understanding.
Well, what we have to do so that the small companies, the small business, we are not talking about Google and Facebook, feel better or are not scared anymore.
But why we have to say that small companies, they can process people's data without asking their consent?
One thing that's really important, I think, just to get that clear. An American smaller company, New York Times, if New York Times would appear in the European Union, they would have the exact same problem as Axel Springer has. So it's not a problem of Europe versus US, it's a problem of big tech versus small tech. Right. And unfortunately, all big tech sits in the US or sits in China. But the differentiation is not US and Europe or China and Europe, it's about having strong enough business models to get people to consent. And unfortunately, you're right, we messed up in the last 20 years that we didn't develop business models in the European Union that are sticky enough, like an Amazon, like a Facebook, like a Google, that is 100% fair. The question is just, what do we do now? I mean, it's pretty clear that Europeans have not been able to build, like with a few exceptions like Spotify, to build, you know, the unicorn type stellar companies in the digital space. 100% understood. But with this, we decrease the chances that now, in the next kind of era, probably industrial internet or whatever, we might be achieving this. That's what I'm saying. So it's not about US and China or US and Europe, it's about big tech with strongly ingrained business models versus companies that don't have this. And fair, we could have done it in the past, but we haven't. So what do we do now? And unfortunately, it's mainly European companies that are in that position, but also smaller US publishers or US publishers in general. CNN has the same problem, or New York Times or Guardian or whatever. Yeah? So and that's the thing. So there must be at least a differentiation between different intrusiveness levels in the privacy among different business models. That could be a potential compromise because, yeah, that's basically, if you look at reality, that's what it is. So we're not arguing Europeans are stupid per se and don't understand the consent rules. That's not what we're saying. It's just the businesses here are not in a position to get into consent so easy as the big companies are. I hope that made the point a little bit clearer because we think we had a little bit of a misunderstanding.
Yes, I think that there are some kind of other misunderstandings also. Too many people, too many entrepreneurs think that in Europe that according to General Data Protection Regulation, you can process data more freely than on basis of ePrivacy regulation. But it's a huge misunderstanding because there are strict rules how to deal with sensitive data also according to General Data Protection Regulation. Some people, they think, some telecom operators, for example, it will be easier when we will not get this e-privacy regulation at all. Who will benefit then? Only global service providers will benefit from this. And our European service providers will lose out. Our people who are asked for confidentiality of communications also when talking about platforms, they will lose out. Ask our people what they think about confidentiality of communication. Practically everybody wants to see their communication will be, confidentiality of communication will be guaranteed.
It's interesting that you have a completely different focus with this regulation. It's always about telecommunication. So basically you have something in mind that is completely different from what people who are criticizing the current draft have in mind. So perhaps it's just worth really going into the details again and perhaps take the concerns that a lot of small and mid-sized companies all around Europe have, take that very seriously, reconsider that, because I think it cannot be that the experts are saying the beneficiaries of that law will be the big American monopolies, and you are basically having in mind something completely different. Perhaps it's worth to really
But Mr.
discuss it
Döpfner,
once
let's,
again.
for the last 5 minutes left,
Can I make
address,
one comment on this
just
telecom thing?
both of you, just addressing the needs to Mr. Ansip.
Yeah.
Just addressing, and so you get the opportunity to respond why
How to make better this
to make this
proposal.
better. Yeah.
So, yeah, as I said, there are many aims. At first, to harmonize those rules across the European Union. Then, to provide this confidentiality of communication to everybody, whatever means that they are using for communications. Telecom, OTTs, no difference. Confidentiality of communication has to be guaranteed. Then, level playing field between OTTs and telecom operators. Today, OTTs, they can process their data, they can monetize data they have, but telecoms, they cannot. And then there are some kind of technical issues. Telecom operators, they are unhappy because of metadata. They think they have to get right to process those metadata without any kind of people's consent. I don't think so, but I'm not fundamentalist. For statistical purposes, for example, yeah, ready for discussions. Then about cookie fatigue, it's also about technicalities for me. Where this dividing line will be, what will be exempted, and so on. We are ready for those discussions. But to say that e-privacy regulation is not so needed at all, we don't care about this regulation, it's not right. It's not right.
Just commenting on the telecom thing. I think the good thing about being a telecom is everybody wants to call somebody. Yeah. So for them, getting a consent for whatever you want to do is easy. If you're Vodafone or if you're Deutsche Telekom, if you are a German citizen or French citizen or whatever, if you want to make calls to somebody, you have to deal with the telecoms provider, so you have to decide for one. So getting a consent, again, is easy. We are more talking about the businesses that are not in a position to achieve this consent thing so easy. So and that's again my point, if you basically would differentiate between highly intrusive businesses, telecom is a highly intrusive business, building complete profiles, especially if you watch TV or your telecom provider, they will have a full picture of all of your surfing behavior, whether you watch porn, whether you watch whatever, they will know that. Yeah? So that's a highly intrusive business model. But there you have no issue to get a consent. Every European will give you consent because they want to make call.
But
and if you're a small company, or if you're Axel Springer, or if you're a startup in the edtech space, getting this consent is just a lot harder because your business model is too irrelevant, relatively speaking. It's not a basic need. Communication is a basic need. Doing e-commerce is a basic need. Using Facebook is a basic need by now for people. I mean, the younger ones probably want to use Instagram, but it's a basic need. So they're willing to accept. Reading something online is not something that is a basic need. And if you don't understand what you agree to, you rather say no. Yeah?
But this is another misunderstanding. Not all the telecom operators, they are happy with this need to ask for people's consent, because they say that their clients, they have to pay anyway, and then there is a question. Why somebody has to process their data, why this telecom operators has to get the right to monetize their data. So
but it's a level playing field.
As you described. I myself, for example, I gave my consent to my operator to process my data. So because I think in this way they will be able to create something really useful also for me. I don't think our people here they will behave somehow unreasonable in an unreasonable way when European enterprises will ask for people's consent, and they don't care about their privacy when Facebook or some others will ask for this consent.
But
Mr. Liegey, maybe a short answer.
Again, if you want to comment, because please go ahead.
Because everybody wants to make calls. So to some person, to some telecom provider, you have to give your consent. That's a fact. You won't find any telecom provider where you don't agree to the things, then you're not calling somebody. That's a big difference. The chances for telecom, they don't like it because it's like an interruption of customer experience. But for them, it's not existential because every customer will agree to one or the other's telecom provider's rules. That's just a fact. But if you are a publisher, you have less targeting quality than Google and than Google and Facebook has anyway, and you have to sell it to your advertisers. You're just weakening your position, and the consumers don't have a strong incentive to do that.
Mr. Heinemann, just a final question, Mr. Döpfner.
Sorry, if I may, there's one comment I'd like to make from my perspective. My perspective is someone who helps politicians communicate better with citizens. And on that debate, I must say, if you're a normal citizen, you have no clue about what's going on. Absolutely. I went to the website today, I did the exercise, I went on the website, and the impression I had was that nothing would change. Because there are 4 small paragraphs describing the changes, but they're a bit technical, so you're not really sure. My point is that it's an amazingly complex debate. You could have technical arguments that will never end, but eventually will affect everyone's life, businesses, but also people. And I mentioned the discussion we had about the monetization of your personal data, because I don't know if that's the solution. It's not my point. My point is that it should be part of the debate, and this should lead to a larger debate with the society in Germany, in France, in Belgium. We all have different views about privacy. And this is maybe something you should include in your roadmap as you implemented this new regulation.
Before running out of time, just a last question, Mr. Döpfner. Is the EU ready for a discussion about the needs of what you figured out today?
I can give you a very short answer, and that is no. And it's not that I accuse them. I have a lot of empathy for the fact that the innovation and acceleration of progress with regard to the digital economy is so fast that even the experts cannot cope with that. How could a politician in Europe know all the details and the effects that a certain regulation has? That's why I really think we need more experts for technology and for the digital economy, which is the economy of the present and the future. There is no other left. And we need a different approach for regulation, and that is agile regulation. If you work for 3 years on a regulation, you can be sure that by the day it's implemented, it's already outdated. Because innovation is happening so fast in Silicon Valley and China and everywhere that it can never be appropriate. So we need, like in a good modern process and project in a company, we need an agile approach. That means you start, you make experiences, you correct, you shift, you pivot, and then you have a more appropriate regulation. That would be my proposal.
Mr. Ansip, I think you hit this a lot before, but let us try to find a solution of things happen here on stage. So the people, the normal people, we are sitting here, feel like we are heard by the EU.
It's mainly about people's consent. And I would like to underline once again that behind of all our articles, I'm still talking about this ePrivacy regulation, there is strong public demand, 92%. And it's never 50-50 or 55-45 or even 60-40. It's maybe, in some cases, 80-20, but it means there is practically unanimity behind of all those articles we put into ePrivacy regulation. It's not out of the blue. Behind of those proposals, there are research works. Public opinion is supporting this. But as I said, we are ready to discuss about technicalities. But I'm not ready to change general principle according with people's consent is as a rule is needed.
It's nice to hear that you're all ready to discuss, so let us discuss. We ran out of time. Gentlemen, thanks a lot for having me today here, honoring us with your appearance. Mr. Vice President, Mr. Heinemann, Mr. Döpfner, and Mr. Liegey, you're staying here. Give me a warm hand for the gentlemen on stage.